The trad wife has become a recent phenomenon in popular culture that is picking up attention due to the deep-rooted misogyny and toxic masculinity disguised as the mid-century modern aesthetic of a traditional housewife. As this trend takes off on TikTok users' For You page, it won't be the topic of discussion here. Instead, we want to offer our audience a different perspective. That's right. Today, we want to talk about Mr. Mom. Hello, and welcome to the You Can Call Me Karen podcast, where we will discuss events from the world around us in an effort to highlight our similarities rather than our differences. I'm Monica Rosa, and I am joined by two of my dearest friends, Stephanie J. and Karen Horwitz. Today's episode, we are going to focus on what it means to be a Mr. Mom. We will discuss the not so popular phenomenon of the working dad, the stay-at-home dad, and the helpful dad, as well as other labels and stereotypes found within quote unquote traditional marriage roles in our society. Before we get started though, let's check in with my co-host and see how their week is going. Karen, Steph, hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. So as we do in the style of this podcast, to kick us off, can you guys let us know who you calling Karen this week?
I'm chuckling because it's just not as cute when I say it. Anywho, this is Karen. I am going to actually throw it back because I had a lovely week with no Karens. And so I'm pulling from the archives of my Who You Calling Karen stories to share a little bit about a time I was on a flight. I had just boarded. I travel a lot. And a lovely woman got on board and was putting her bag on the upper part. Why do I have no words? Putting her bag up. And
what is that thing called?
I don't know. All of a sudden I'm panicking. I should know what that is. Anywho.
Overhead compartment.
Thank you. And I can't recall exactly what the issue was. She put it sideways and it was supposed to go lengthways or something that made the flight attendant correct her. And she got a huge attitude and was like, it doesn't fit that way. You know, I travel all the time or whatever. And everyone around was like kind of taken aback. It felt pretty unnecessary, the response. And so there was this tussle over the bag, which literally expanded to an all-out brawl. I mean, there was no punches being thrown, but if she did, I would have thought that was a perfectly natural part of this story. And then fast forward, by the way, she got kicked off the flight. They kicked her off the flight.
What?
Yes, it was like the epitome of Karen, entitled lady who was like, no, I am going to put my bag up the way that I want it. And the flight attendant was just basically, because we were still boarding, the flight attendant, I'm projecting a little bit, it was basically like, I can't have this lady on my flight. I can't, when we're up in the air, I can't handle the knowledge of her physically being here. So she got the pilots involved, and then the pilots called security, and off went Karen. She did not get to take our flight.
And that, my friends, is why you don't be an a-hole.
Just please don't be an a-hole. It was something. This is where I'm really trying to shift my perspectives. Because I feel like something had to be going on with this woman, right? You don't just wake up in the morning I'm going to cut a bitch over the overhead compartment. Something had to be up. That's just not a normal response to a slight correction.
Right.
I don't know.
Inconvenience.
Anyways, that was one of my more epic Karen stories. So thank you, Karen.
That is pretty epic. That's epic. Thank you, Airplane Karen.
Oh, they're all going to get labels now. There's going to be a lot of dance team Karens, though. You can see that for your future stuff.
Yes, speaking of, so most of a lot of what I do, especially in the summertime, is travel for dance. And one of my trips this past summer, I was traveling with some teachers. There were five of us that were sharing like a condo. We all had plenty of space. It was pretty comfortable, so that was not the issue or anything. But there were five of us. I am probably the most senior member of the staff, and so there's just kind of an unspoken hierarchy and just kind of like that happens in our studio, and we just kind of like give each other the respect, like my director, she would get first pick on things and would kind of like, and it's just kind of unspoken and natural. And I'm not really one for that, but sometimes, it's nice when that respect is given, if that makes sense. So each night for the what we were there for was a competition, and each night we had one car for all five of us, and we all had varying schedules. And so to go to the competition and have to sit in the convention center to watch the competition, you kind of were trying to figure out how you could be there the least often. And I think Manny and Karen, you guys can relate to that when we are planning.
Those convention centers are dark.
Yes.
It's like Vegas almost, but not with the money.
Yes, so it's sometimes Vegas, by the way.
I just feel like we have had these conversations like, okay, what time are we going to get there? And how long are we going to have to sit there? And we need to figure out a plan where we can maybe get outside and breathe for a second and stuff. So everybody's kind of like, I really only need to be there at this time and that time and so on and so forth. So each night we would all look at our competition schedules, and I need to be there in the morning. Okay, so you can drive the car in the morning, come back to the house, pick us up, we'll come, and then we'll all be together. Or tomorrow, I don't need to be there at all, but I will drive you there and I'll come and support and cheer everybody on. Like, and I was very much like game, like whatever you guys want. The car was in my name. I really should have been the one driving. I was letting them drive the car if there was a time when I didn't need to be there. And but I was always very flexible. And for the most part, the first 2 days, I hardly had anything, but was always the one driving them there, was always there to like support and cheer, even though I didn't really have much going on. Well, there was a day where I didn't need to be there until 12:30, and one of the younger teachers needed to be there at 7:30. And so we were like, you take the car and then you're going to come on back and pick us up. And but this is something like a few of us talked about, but she wasn't a part of the conversation. And so she just went to bed without asking what the plan was. Then homegirl pops her head out and she was like, wait, what's the plan for the car tomorrow? We're like, oh, you can just take it and then you'll just come back and pick us up because the rest of us don't need to be there till like noon. And she was like, I wasn't planning on coming back. And we were like, I'm sorry, what? And
this other one of you to get there.
What?
There's only one of you
supposed to get there.
Yeah. And like, we were just all like kind of taken aback. And this one girl who's very like problem solver, and like she was like, I can come back one. And she ended up being like, it was not right for her to come back. She had a dance like right before we needed to be there, right after. It was awful that she was the one to come back. So mine's kind of twofold. Like I'm kind of asking you who you calling Karen, because I'm calling her Karen. But the next day, but I also felt like I was being a Karen because I sent a text. I sent a text to the group like, this seems a little unnecessary and challenging for the volunteer. Could you come back and get us? Because you seem to be on a break. So I don't know who you calling Karen. I think since I've turned 40, I have found my voice, and I felt like it was important for me to speak up. I felt like it was wrong of that girl to have to run back and forth between dances. And I was just, what took me aback was that I wasn't planning on coming back. Just the lack of like consideration for anybody else with one car, 5 people. And it just felt, it like kind of left it in the air because I also am not super confrontational. Besides, like, I think that you should come back. She said no. The other girl did it anyway. That's how it ended. But I'm like, who you calling Karen? Because I'm calling her Karen, but she might think I'm the Karen because I called her out. I don't know.
Well, but you could have more than one Karen, and also like I think what we're learning from this so far, at least, is that there are times when using your inner Karen is important. And
Mhm.
so we've got to be able to find that balance
Mhm.
of like not abusing your right to be a Karen every now and
Mhm.
then.
Yeah, and I think that's an important. I love that introspection that you're taking, because like part of the purpose of this podcast is not to like go out calling everybody stereotypes and labels. It's to
Mhm.
also like reflect that we all experience and have these feelings and thoughts that make us consider other people pains in the behinds, and
Mhm.
sometimes we react to them and sometimes we're able to like restraint,
Mhm.
but it's not that we're like classifying, like pointing that like these are the people and outcast them. And I think one time we'll talk about cancel culture and stuff, but it's to really just understand that we all experience these things and to better come up with solutions on how we can coexist with other people. And part of that
Mhm.
is in talking about our conflict with others and being like, wait,
Mhm.
who did the thing?
Who did the thing?
you know?
Yeah.
And
And
can
I thought it
both
was
parties be
interesting.
right or both parties
Both.
be
Yeah.
wrong? Like,
Right,
Mhm.
right, right. Yeah.
because we
And I
always
thought
see
it
it
was
from our
interesting that I
perspective.
even said
Right.
anything. I think that was what like made me reflect a little bit, because I feel like, 5 or 6 years ago, I would have just left it alone. But
Yeah.
something made me say something, and I'm like, is
Mhm.
that my inner Karen bubbling up? Like, am I starting
Yeah.
to, you
Yeah,
know?
there's definitely a fine line between like speaking up for yourself
Mhm.
and like entitlement, right? And I think that
Mhm.
that's why it gets so blurry, and that's
Blurry.
why the we're experiencing this as a society right now of like what's the difference between speaking up and holding somebody else accountable
Mhm.
and overstepping my boundaries and being entitled, and
Mhm.
we don't always know the answer. So
Mhm.
And you raised something interesting, and then I know we'll move to today's topics.
Mhm.
Sorry, but Steph, you said something that struck me of like, now that I'm 40, and it's
Mhm.
like, I do think there is something there, and I would love to go back and look at the more famous Karens, but
Mhm.
of feeling more confident to stand your ground and speak your
Mhm.
mind as you get older and
Mhm.
just like more experience in life. And
Mhm.
so it is tricky, like
Mhm.
this, speaking your mind versus entitlement, and a little bit it's perception. So I
Mhm.
may be thinking at times that I'm just standing up for myself, and it can be received as coming off as
Mm.
entitled or privileged, and you won't ever kind of find that common ground. So
Oh my
it's
gosh.
just interesting, something
Oh,
to
yeah.
explore.
you just unlocked so many things for me. Yeah.
Yay.
Free.
All right. Well, so now that we've gotten our Karens out of the way, let's get to our topic for today. But before we do that, I do want to give a little bit of context of how this topic came up for us and what is going on the interwebs and in the cyber universe. And that is this trend of the trad wife. In fact, yesterday it came up in my TikTok feed again. And I just want to say we're not going to talk about that today. There are some really interesting conversations. Two podcasts in particular I'd love to direct people to. One is In Bed with the Right, and the other is, gosh, now what's the Sarah Marshall one? I just brain fart. Oh,
Oh my gosh.
you're wrong about.
You're wrong about. Oh, sorry,
Oh,
Sarah Marshall. You're amazing.
yes,
We love you.
you're our idol. We want to be on your show one day, and we want you on ours.
This is just a little stressful, and sometimes it's hard to recall. Okay, proceed.
And so these two podcasts go really deep into the trad wife conversation. And we just encourage everyone to take a listen to that to better understand why what the contrast is here, I guess, and that we are kind of being a little bit snarky when we're talking about like Mr. Mom, and it's only in response to the trad wife. And I do also want to say that if tradwifery is the preferred, is that how it's called?
I
Is
think so.
your preferred lifestyle, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I feel like that if that is what you truly authentically believe you should be, how you should be operating in this life, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think Sarah Marshall and her guests talk about this, that like that is your prerogative, but it's when we start to suggest or make statements that other people should be existing in this realm too, that's where the conflict comes from. So I wanted to get that out of the way. And I also wanted to say that, we are positioning ourselves in this conversation around cis heterosexual relationships. And we recognize that, and we don't want to be ignorant to the fact that this is not, that this conversation is about those relationships, and we recognize that that this might not be the same. Mr. Mom, quote unquote, might not be what our friends in the LGBTQ community experience in their relationship, but I also think that in some way it does make it a little bit challenging for people who are in that community to come out and experience great joy in their relationship because of the hate-filled and the I want to say like how people think about the dynamic within a relationship, that there should be a woman and a man. And so one of the things that I think keep people from expressing themselves and their relationships that are not heteronormative is these stereotypes, right? Of like, well, how can that be? Who's going to be the breadwinner? Or who's going to take care of the kids when you have the same genders or whatnot, right? And so I just want to, before we even dive deep into that, recognize that, we are talking from our own experience, which is all that we can do on this podcast. But yeah, but I do also, gosh, I have a lot of alsos here, huh? I do, in terms of like admitting, our ignorance. I read this book, This Is How It Always Is, a couple years ago. And here I was thinking that I was, of a certain ideology, very progressive. And This Is How It Always Is really opened up my mind to some of my blind spots and my biases for um, what it means to be in alliance with the transgender community. And that is one of the reasons why this topic is, for me, an important discussion. And one of the things in particular that I'm thinking about is the chapter in that book where the doctor, our psychologist, prescribed the parents a exercise to practice of how gender is played out in their relationship, and to write down every way in which would see gender reflected in their sons would see gender reflected in their relationship in their household. And the conversation that spurred out of that was really fascinating. So if you have not read This Is How It Always Is, that's like one of my recommendations. I think that should be a read for everyone, but especially for parents, for PTAs, for any school board members. I highly recommend it. So that's the what I wanted to get, a little bit of housekeeping that I wanted to get out of the way. And before I turn it over to Karen and Steph, I do also want to say that we are recording this podcast on July 26th. This is about 4 days after Vice President Kamala Harris has put in her bid to be the president of the United States. And so with that, everyone has been talking about Kamala being the first lady, but, this conversation is also about her husband, Doug, being the first man. And that is like...
First man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
that's just, I've not heard that express, or maybe I have, but yeah, that hit me different today.
Yeah. So how cool, the synchronicity and all that, and how we are going to be bringing in this topic today. So anyway, that's enough out of me for now. I just want to talk a little bit open it up to Karen and Steph about your experience with quote unquote Mr. Mom. What, like, comes to mind when you think about that phrase? Do you have any experience with this in your current relationship with your spouse, the gender roles in your marriage, anything along those lines that might be helpful for our listeners to get some context about what we're talking about today?
I can go first. So my husband, Steve, we have a 2-year-old, and we, so when Steve and I met, I was already, in my current career. I am a school teacher and a dance teacher. So I have 2 jobs, and my time is crazy. Like, I work kind of a 7 to 5 kind of a deal for school. And then I teach dance in the evening till like 10 p.m. I teach on Saturdays until like 1 p.m. And I kind of made that clear from when we met, because
She
when
did.
we I did make it
As
clear.
you should.
I actually reached out to Manny on this, because I was like, I don't know that he's ready for the type of busy that I am, and he says that he's okay with it, but here we go. And so even from the beginning, understanding that what I do, I'm passionate about, and it does take up time, but I do make space for the people I love, and I will make space for you. And so just know that, like, so already we were starting out with that I worked a lot more than he worked. And so we were already kind of making adjustments when that came to be. At that time, I also I taught 2 nights a week and Saturdays. When we got married, we just and started to plan to have our baby girl. I cut one of those nights out, but I was not prepared to cut out the other aspect of my career. It's what brings me joy. It's what I'm passionate about. What we do. I believe in all those kind of things, and I feel like he has been very supportive of that. But that does cause him to have to step up and take the lead. He does drop off, pick up from daycare. He does dinner, packs lunches, all of those things. And he, I think, is happy to do it. That's his, he always says, he's like, my love language is acts of service. And he loves a thank you. He loves an acknowledgement. Like, if I notice that he did something and I'm like, hey, I noticed you XYZ, he's like, thank you. Thank you for noticing. Yes, I did. He just loves, like, he loves that. And so when he feels like he's contributing, that's when he feels most like valuable, and he feels proud to contribute to our household. And so that is kind of how we operate. But what I notice is that when I'm not home is usually when they call grandma and grandpa, and they will FaceTime, and that's when Quinny gets to like FaceTime with grandma and grandpa. And and even though he loves to do what he does for our family, that doesn't mean that there's not days where it's hard. There's not days where he's frustrated. There's not days when he is exhausted. He just wants a break, all of those kind of things. And I notice sometimes, like, if I happen to be home when we call grandma and grandpa, and when I say grandma and grandpa, I'm talking about his parents, they'll be like, oh, you're home, to me. Oh, it's nice to see you all together. Or it's
Because
nice
they're used to seeing not you
him,
there.
not me there. And I feel like those are some moments where he kind of gets these like hard knock reminders of like, it's not how it traditionally was, or that's not how he grew up. His mom was stay at home, and there were 5 kids, and she was stay at home. And when she did work, it was lighter, more part-time. She was home when they were home. She made all the meals, packed all the lunches, all that kind of stuff. And it was his dad that didn't get home till 6 or 7 p.m. And so I think that I just kind of wonder, like, how he was brought up, my husband was brought up, informs like what kind of dad he's choosing to be, and how, like, on those hard days, what is informing his frustrations. Yeah. I think about that a lot. But he's amazing. I mean, I feel no stress as a mom leaving Quinn with dad. He is just very hands-on. He's very engaged. He understands the hair bows and he understands like all the things that I want, and all the things that he wants. And he's amazing. But I do know that there's like his upbringing that might challenge the dad he's choosing to be in our family. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
It is interesting. I'll share a little bit about my experience as well, because Steph, I'd love to hear too, like growing up for you, were your parents more traditional? Because I'm guessing that they were, just based on what I know about your family. So for me, it kind of started with my family. Like my parents did not always play traditional gender roles. My dad was more the breadwinner, but my mom worked. She was a nurse, and we were part-time in daycare when I was young. And I remember I have very fond memories of when we were old enough to stay home alone, like my sister watching us when, over the summers when my mom was at work and stuff. And like there was little things we always joked with our friends, with you guys in college, like my mom drank the beer and my dad did the laundry and the grocery shopping and the cooking, and like there was very much different, a mix of gender norms, I guess, in our household. And I've always been very like career focused and driven, and I've always said that like whoever I ended up with would just very much need to be a feminist, like at the end of the day. Like they would need to be supportive of my goals. And I found that. And my husband is similar to Steve in a lot of ways. Like he does all the drop-offs and pickups. Whenever I pick up from school, people are like, "Oh, you're Maxwell's mom." And I'm like, I mean, you don't have to make me feel like shit. But okay, here we are. Yeah. And by the way, like every time I'm at the park with Max or something like that, like I will have a dad, like approach me and be like, "Oh, you're Max's mom. I know your husband, blah, 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 blah." Like, so the dad is the one doing the drop-offs and the pickups in that family as well. Like there is a lot of men in that role these days. Yeah. And so I think the Mr. Mom term is something that like strikes a chord with me. It sounds like derogatory or negative. And the reality, I feel like, is that it's much more even. At least I live in the city, so like maybe it's a little bit different than in more rural or suburban locations. Sorry, I'm over caffeinated. And so like, yeah, maybe that looks a little bit different depending on where you live, but where I live, it's like we are not abnormal in any way, shape, or form. And I think that it's beautiful. Like my son gets to see a dad that's like super active in his day to day. I travel a fair amount for work, and so they have like 2, 3, 4 days in a row where it's just the boys. And I went on a girls trip last weekend. Oh my gosh, it sounds like I'm not present. Yeah, it sounds like I'm not present at all, I swear. But I am. But I was away last weekend, and we had this big festival on our street in the city that's called Burger Fest, and Max like loves it. He gets to eat corn dogs in the street and like bounce in these like big bouncy houses and stuff. And I FaceTimed at one point and I was like, "I'm coming home tomorrow. I can't wait to see you." And he's like, "No, don't come home. We're having so much fun." Which is the way I want that to be. Like I want to be missed, of course, but it's hard to be gone. And then the kiddos are sad on FaceTime. And so when I see him having so much fun with his dad, it's like I couldn't be happier. Like that just it makes me able to enjoy my time and stuff. Like you said, like leaving Maxwell with my husband Bob, it's like great. They are having a blast. I have no worries whatsoever. And that just feels pretty damn good as a mom to like not have that angst. So
Mhm.
I hate that Mr. Mom has a negative connotation for me. I wish it didn't. But I
Mhm.
also wish it could just be like Mr. Dad and have the same meaning.
Right. Well,
Ooh.
stay at home dad, right? Stay at home dad doesn't have the same meaning as like stay at home mom, right? And
No.
Mhm.
so,
Well, and to be clear, neither of our husbands are stay-at-home dads. Like they
right.
have jobs,
Jobs.
so
Yeah.
they're picking up a lot of slack here and they should get a lot of credit for that.
Well, I think that you're bringing up like a good point of like, okay, so I've heard two things, and I'm going to try to center it around what I saw yesterday on another guys. I know I want you to join TikTok, but like also don't join TikTok because you get like sucked in.
Mhm.
I don't have time for that, girl.
but one of the things that I saw was a man talking about in context to the whole Kamala Harris uh, putting her bid in for presidency is that, you know, people are saying like, oh, this is progress for women. Oh, this is progress for Black people. And the narrator was saying, actually, no. Black people and women have always been intelligent enough, have always been
Mm.
overqualified. This is progress for white cis men, right?
Mm.
Yeah. And I loved that. And I think that that is like similar to what we're talking about here, that like this is actually progress for men, right?
Mhm.
They get to understand the invisible load that women were carrying for so long.
Mhm.
And it opens up this gateway to empathy and trust
Mhm.
with us and our partners. And that's why I subscribe to this lifestyle, because that's the kind of partnership that feels everlasting to me. And
Mhm.
so I heard that in both of your responses, and Luke is the same way, you know, and I get the similar thing of like, oh, you're Miles' mom, oh, you know.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'm like, do you need to be so startled by that? Like, yes, my child has two parents, and I'm sorry, one of them has a more flexible job to do the drop off and the pickup. Like, that's pretty
Mhm.
typical.
Yeah.
You don't have to be so
Well, and
shocked.
mine, I am very capable of doing drop off and pickup, but I have to tell you that like on top of the other, again, invisible load that I do, on top of the
Mhm.
scheduling and the, you know, I'll wake up and I already have 30 missed text messages from group mom chats, right? I'm
Mm.
exhausted. It's 9:45 in the morning, you know? And
Mhm.
so like, I'm also an introvert. So going in and also having to do school drop off on top of the conversations that I've had on my cell phone prior to is a lot for me, you know? So, like, the
Mhm.
fact that I have a husband who's going to help protect my mental health in that way
Mm.
is so loving, you know?
Mhm.
And then, Karen, I also heard you talk about like your, and this is, I know we have to wrap up soon. So, I'll just push us into this direction of when you were talking about your family and how you grew up. And so I can't remember if I've mentioned on the podcast or not that I lost my dad when I was 8 years old. So I didn't really have a childhood where there was any gender role dynamic. My mom
Mm.
was both.
Mm.
She brought the masculine and the feminine energy. And I'm learning a lot about that as I walk through life with a partner. So for me, and bringing in the last kind of segment, I guess, of our podcast today, is that my depiction of a dad was from pop culture and media.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how I learned what a dad was supposed to be. And so when I look at my husband care for my kids, I'm like, this is what a dad is, you know, like I get so confused sometimes because I'm like, is that how this is weird to me? I never experienced this, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, as we close out the podcast, I'd love to hear like, who's your favorite TV dad, or what are some of the like dads depicted on children's shows that you're watching with your kids that you're like, why the hell are they saying like, why is Daddy Pig such an idiot? You know what I mean? Like,
Oh my gosh, but I love Bandit from Bluey. I
yes,
love him
he's
so
amazing.
much.
He's so now that's what I was
Oh.
saying.
Mm.
Okay, so anyway, I just want to throw that out. Who's your favorite TV dad, or what are your experiences watching like dads on TV, and how does that connect to this quote unquote like Mr. Dad concept?
Mm. If
I'll
I'm gonna
go.
have you go first, yeah.
Sure, yeah. I also feel like I'm kind of the only one who didn't really talk about like my parents, just briefly, like my mom did work. Both my mom and dad worked, but my mom left work early enough to be the one at home doing dinner, checking homework, and then there were some things that were shared, but the traditional laundry, food, like all that stuff was definitely my mom. And so anyway, I just wanted to chime in because that kind of informs, like, I think I knew when I got married that I wanted to work because I watched my mom work, and she so I knew that, like, I wasn't stay-at-home mom was not in my DNA because I watched my mom have a pretty high challenging career, and still I felt she was very present for me, and that's what I think is possible. But anyway, favorite TV dad. My favorite TV dad is Philip Banks on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Period. Point blank.
Uncle Phil.
Uncle Phil, because he is Uncle Phil, and his children were not all biological, and he had high expectations, strong, tough conversations. He worked, Aunt Viv worked, and still present in all their kids' lives. And Uncle Phil, man.
Uncle Phil, man.
It's funny because I was thinking about, the shows that I watched as a kid, and the big one that came to my mind was Saved by the Bell. And so I know. I just fucking loved that show, man.
Mr. Balding?
Mr. Belding. But no, I was thinking, like, oh, he's kind of a TV dad, like he was a father figure in that show. Anywho, I love you, Mr. Belding. But I think Bandit is by far, like, my favorite TV dad ever. Bandit, the fake animated dog. Yeah, because he is fire and makes me feel like a bad parent, honestly, when I watch that show.
I know. Bluey does make me feel like, damn, I got to up my imaginative play.
Yeah, no, I can't even. There's no competition whatsoever. Like, he wins the day. He is the best.
They are so present.
My final answer.
Kids. Yeah, that's a good one. I would have to go with Danny Tanner, and I can't believe that there was any other answer other than.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to steal your thunder. I knew where you were going with this.
Bob Saget.
Oh man.
R.I.P. James Avery.
However, I do, like, when you were talking about your, like, childhood and losing your father early, I do find it very interesting that you gravitated towards Danny Tanner, because he lost his wife. He was a single parent. He had to fulfill both roles, and he did it fantastically. So I think there is interesting that you found in a TV character something that you could see in your own life. I thought that was cool.
Thank you. I'm not going to go to therapy this afternoon because you just unlocked it all.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, thanks. Our work here is done.
Sorry, internet, but you're fired.
Oh, saving on those bills up in here.
Anyway, okay, so we have like a couple minutes left, and I just want to again guide people to one more suggestion that I came across on social media, because again, a lot of what we're talking about is like in our lives, but when we're thinking about society and when we're looking at this from like a generalized view of how we can all kind of have these collective conversations, social media can be used for good to like get some of this understanding and to share some of our, insights. So I came across that husband PSA account, and what he does is he talks to men about how to show up in their heteronormative relationships with their wives. And so if there are any men listening to this podcast who are interested in ways of how to grow in their relationship, how to show up for their partner, definitely give that account a view and a like, and I think you'll find it to be pretty funny and informative. So
I love that you said, if there are any men listening to
still listening,
hang in there, men. There's got to be something here for you.
We just celebrated men this whole episode.
Yeah, we have been
celebrating our men.
Yeah, but they're not listening.
I know 3 men who will better be listening.
Hey, Bill.
What I do know is you can track like listenership. And so I will be looking for a man in New Jersey and in Ohio that has listened in its entirety. I'm watching you, Luke and Steve.
Yes. All right. So, ladies, confessionals before we wrap this episode up. What you got?
I have one that I had to jot down while we were chatting because it hit me. Manny, when you were introducing the topic and you were talking about how we recognize that this conversation is definitely more like cis heterosexual focused and like the kind of traditional roles of male and female, it did occur to me that when I think of like homosexual relationships, for example, that there is this like need to place one partner in the male role and one partner in the female role, even if they're same-sex couple, which like I have found myself contemplating before, as much as I hate to admit that out loud. And I guess I don't have an answer. Maybe this is a topic for a future, I don't know, episode, but just like, is that a requirement? Like, do we need to have both sides? Because it's very clear from today's discussion that one person can play both the, maternal and paternal role at times. And so in a maybe non-gender conforming or what is the word? Heteronormative relationship, then does that change? Does that blend over time, or do you need one or the other? I guess my confession is that I don't really know the answer to that question. And I've realized that through this discussion that I probably need to be better educated on that.
I love that.
I love that.
I have a quick response to that of like that. I think, what is uncovered for me is that if we just let go of the need to assign it, that it will occur naturally. So in some times I'm in my masculine energy, and sometimes I'm in my feminine energy, and sometimes my husband's in his feminine energy, and sometimes he's in his masculine energy. And the whole point, I believe, of like being in a partnership is to balance that. And so that's the discovery. That's the reason for doing the thing, right? Is to try to find that harmony, right? And to recognize when, we are off balance in that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be assigned to a gender, right?
Yes.
So I think that's
I love that. I love that so much.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, was when hearing you say that is like, I feel like what we have kind of come to the conclusion is that the partnership it's the partnership, and here are the things that need to get done. You got to cook, you got to clean, you got to give baths, you got to cut nails, you got to do hair, you got to pack lunches, and somebody's going to do some of it and somebody's going to do another bit of it. And who you are, whether you're male or female, does not matter. Those jobs need to get done.
Yeah.
And so if we just stop, like, I feel like when we're talking about the masculine versus feminine role, I think that comes from how marriages have been defined before us. And I think our generation is like, no, we're a team, we're going to get this stuff done, and deal break. Like, we have a powwow, you handle your business, I handle mine, and we function.
Yeah.
And so, and I think my confessional is that I think, like, Karen, you said it, Manny, you said it, I said it, like, when you show up and they're like, oh, you're Quinn's mom, or Steve's parents, oh, you're home. I can't believe you're actually home. And I feel like those comments burn a little bit, but I think that is more to do with me than it is with them. And so I think, Karen, you and I talked about this when I visited you. Like, I can't let those comments, that just means that I have some grappling to do with mom guilt, and realizing that we do have an understanding in my home, and I can't let outside influences take away from this wonderful thing that we have. in our house.
Yes.
So.
That is a beautiful way to wrap the day.
Yes.
So good confessional.
Yes. Thank you, guys. That is a wrap.
Oh,
Cut it out.
oh my gosh.
Ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same.